Hey folks, a long time no speak. As you can see, I'm back with a deck collection update, but before I dive into that, I just want to quickly preface my reason for filming these and say hey and catch up. My YouTube has swiftly changed into a place for light, fun content, which you'll likely know by now if you've known me for a while. My Instagram's where I feel most comfortable getting into sharing aspects of my practice and just parts of my world. Patreon, I get a little deeper still, at least in places, sharing more elements, and then as well as the various interactive offerings, rituals, exercises, readings, lessons, folklore, etc. So YouTube has taken a significant backseat, and to be honest, I've no desire to explore my depths here. It's not really the platform for me to do that. I don't show my face on this platform. It's not the one that I'm most comfortable on or that feels the most accessible to my needs, if I'm honest. But that being said, I don't want to quit on YouTube, so here we are. These collection videos are going to serve me, at least in a few ways, and that's really starting with offering me a reflective practice as I move through each deck quickly. My collection is slightly larger than usual, and while I often keep a really tight ship, spring cleaning and moving on anything that I no longer feel is purposeful to my practice, I feel that this is a lovely extension of that. It'll be interesting to consider how much has changed as well in the years since sharing anything like this here. And it's a pretty chill way for me to dip back into the tube community and say hello. For anyone watching, hopefully it'll be fun for you still, and my chosen categories might help you get a bit of a feel for the type of decks I use, insight, I suppose, into my practice a little bit. And it also allows people to request reviews if they do see anything that they'd love to hear more about. It is not meant to be a shopping list, however, although you do you. I, as per always, will not be taking responsibility for how people engage with my content, but mostly, as I say, I've come on really to do this for me and a few lovely friends who genuinely expressed excitement about seeing this too, who can't come and visit me in real life, so it's a fun way to share that with each other. Might as well share it here as well, and everyone else watching who enjoys it is a welcome bonus. So before we jump in, you can already see today's category. I don't have these pre-filmed. This is my first one that I'm filming, so they will take some time, but just so you know what to expect, these are the coming categories thus far. I've got today's, which is Skeleton, Twilight Hours and Macabre decks. Yes, I got a little fancy with some of the categories. Nature-based, animistic and folksy decks. Fae, flora and tree decks. Animal-only decks, people not advised. And then, because that is my largest section, I may break that into a second one, which is animal decks that only focus on one animal in particular, as opposed to the mixed animal decks. People of the World decks, which is essentially the decks that have got people in that don't fit anywhere else. Astrology, cosmic and otherworldly decks. Fandom, festive and funny decks, and then finally Lenormand, playing card and affirmation decks. And I'm sure if there's any misc, that's going to go in that one as well. Some of these will be short and sweet, consisting of around no more than 6 decks, whereas others will have like 20 plus and may even need splitting into a part 1 and part 2, depending on how concise I can be. But overall, these were the best working categories. And just finally, before we jump in, they're not meant to box in the decks. Many of these decks could be placed into multiple categories that I created, multiple themes, Please don't take it too seriously. It really was just meant to be a fun way to separate and segment the series and help anyone looking for particular styles, I suppose, as well. So that's the intro. Today, as I say, we're going to be jumping into Skeleton, Twilight Hours and Macabre decks. And for any decks that you don't see in these by the time this collection video is done, it means that they've left the building, they have left my collection possibly a long time ago. I have a couple of others that I am not keeping, so I won't be including in these. First up is the Antique Anatomy Ephemera Tarot, and I do have both the indie, which is this one, and the mass market. I'm ever so slightly more fond of this one and the few depictions in this one. But they're not massively different, and if you can only get the mass market, because of course that's the only one in print, then I still highly recommend it. This is totally my aesthetic. It's very spacious in feel, which is something you're probably going to hear me say a lot. This High Priestess, she was changed, and this one is my absolute fave. There's something more creepy about this one, and I fucking love it. Yeah, there's the spaciousness, the pippishness is kind of something that I really gravitate towards nowadays. Although maybe they're not the biggest portion, you will see quite a few in my collection that have this kind of vibe, but this is my favourite of them all. I'm really fond of the creator as well, so there's that. I love the choice of floral colours. I think it really adds to the mood of the deck, and to be honest, I feel very bonded with this one. This is one that I've worked with a hell of a lot, even though my collection is somewhat large now. And there have been months when I've worked almost solely with this on its own. I have a lot of her other decks as well, and they of course work beautifully together. But it is just my vibe. It's a very me kind of deck. It means that I don't feel particularly boxed in by a specific system. Of course you can see various influences, but overall it's quite an expansive experience for me, and that's something that I really value. Next is the Wooden Tarot, and I nearly didn't put this one in this category, but it does feel very macabre to me, if I'm honest. There are quite a lot of themes that pull upon death, that pull upon the creepy and peculiar, and it definitely fits in this category still, although it is a very nature deck as well. But actually a lot of people say to me how macabre they feel this deck is, and I suppose maybe I sometimes don't notice. But this is the deck, one of them that really kind of was one that I went into that more spacious, more pippish deck place, and I used the animals to kind of bounce from a place of comfort and systems that I was more familiar with to this kind of style where I was using more numerology. There are other decks that started that off, but this was one that I had really early on, and I have done so much study with this deck that now we're very freaking intimate. I love the animal inclusions. They're actually really thoughtful, as are the flowers. I did do a really long video if you want to know what everything is. But again, I find this a very peaceful reader, a very easy reader. And I can't remember what tag it was, but recently there was a tag and it mentioned sort of like full 2 decks and lazy readers. And whilst I didn't choose this or the Antique Anatomy for that tag, I chose another because I've been doing tags over on my Instagram. Actually, I know these two well enough that they feel a lazy reader in terms of they're very seamless. I have formed experiences and meanings for each of the cards alongside all of the intuitive and relevant to the moment kind of things that come up when you're reading. So again, this is like an old friend, so was the previous one. Next we've got the Marigold Tarot, and you can see big fan of skeletons and bones, big fan. This is probably one of my, I mean I love all my decks, but this is probably one of my favourite categories. and the Marigold Tarot is just exquisite. I've come to really, on a side note, love linen cardstock because it's very kind to my hands in ways that I didn't know I needed until, unfortunately, I did. This feels wildly familiar and personable. They still feel very people-y to me, even though they're skeletons. They really are like the skeletons of the past come back to work with us through tarot. There's something really special about what the creator did with this deck. I love that it is beautifully reflective of her culture and her experience as well within the deck. Maybe the pips, I would say, are a little less suggestive sometimes of their meaning, but I'm really not here to tell people what's a beginner deck and what's not. That's not really my style anymore. But in terms of reading, I do really enjoy this one. Most of my decks, I would say, are pretty everyday readers for me. I don't get too much into only reading them for certain things, but this again is especially works really well for me no matter what I want to do with it. And maybe that's just because of how fond I am of the artwork, to be honest. Very much like the previous two, we're looking at really some of my favourite decks with these three. This one is one that I feel that maybe not as many people are going to be familiar with, and the pips are really plain, as you can see. This is the Cursed Auguries Tarot, and I freaking love it. It is witchy as fuck. The mages and the cults actually weave through a particular story, although there isn't a book that comes with this. I would encourage reading the creators' sort of brief discussion of the deck on their Etsy. That's if it's still available. It has a lot of elements that really reflect my personal practice, which is one of the reasons that I was really drawn to it. The specific animals, not shying away from like the harder parts of life and the earthier parts of magic and just the cycles that we go through. I love the representation, the apples for the pentacles. It's all really well put together, and if you don't mind this type of pips and you're okay, you work with numerology, you can Rider-Waite-Smith this deck as well, but it really is gonna speak to you of a different story in some of the cards, because look at this full card. So it does do its own thing. I do want to work with it more this year. I really do enjoy it. The only thing I would say is naturally when I get to the cards that are kind of stark and plain in their representation like this, I do just fall back onto all of my knowledge, the question, the intuitive hits that I've got and all of that good stuff, as well as the surrounding cards. But this is a mood and I'm here for it. Next is the Deviant Moon borderless edition, and the artwork in this deck is everything to me. It's a little bit obscure, it's a little strange, but really it could have gone in so many areas for me, and I'm one of the people who doesn't find this particularly strange. I don't find it particularly unsettling. I do feel like it's a time of twilight hours, so it really fits with that part of it. It's mostly quite a fun deck for me to use. Not that I can't take it seriously, but this world I find really just, I don't know, inviting still. I know that that's strange for some people. My one sadness about this deck is that I don't actually use it anywhere near as much as I would like to. And it's going to sound silly, but it's the cardstock. It's not going to show very much from here, but they're long and thin, and I do have a difficult time shuffling it. I can only shuffle overhand because of hand pain, and it does tend to upset my hands really quickly long ways for some unknown reason. So I just don't use it as much as I would like to, but it invites me into various different places that I could explore that maybe I wouldn't so much with one of my more spacious decks as well. You know, it gives me a little bit more story. It gives me some character reflection, and I guess just calls me into another space, which I enjoy. So this is another big deck. This one is bigger than the Deviant Moon. This is the limited edition Murder of Crows deck. I did manage to snag a limited edition. The red editions in this are everything. They really make a difference for me, and it's a mood. I'm vibing with it. That kind of bloodied look, it definitely gets me into the space of the world. There is laughter in it, there is fun in it, there's lust in it, there's all of that good stuff, but it is, for me at least, it does really play on some of the, I guess, more challenging parts of life's experience, or the parts of ourselves that maybe we like to pretend don't exist, the parts that we're less welcoming of. Those kind of aspects I feel that this deck really speaks well to. I do particularly feel drawn to this deck for specific rituals. I feel very drawn to this when I have a lot of turmoil going on. Oh, I love this. The Crow of Dawn. If this isn't Odin, then I don't know what is. Sorry, this isn't actually in the other version as well. There are, depending if you want to call them 2 or 4, and they're actually together, which is useful. These are solely in the limited edition, and they're double-sided, which is a little bit disappointing, but I would have preferred them to be 4 separates. This deck is something special, and whilst it doesn't come out all the time, and not often do I share the readings that I do with this deck, I don't know if that's a reflection of the readings or what, but I'm really enjoying having it. It really hurts my hand, so I'm going to put it down now, but it is an awesome deck. This is the Robert M. Place Vampire Tarot. It is out of print. I really freaking love vampires, vampire literature. I really love Bram Stoker, which was one of the heaviest influences on this deck, amongst Nosferatu and other Dracula and vampire renditions. Robert M. Place really goes into literary vampires as a reflection psychologically of like various aspects of the psyche and ego, and it's got such a fascinating book that I'm still reading the book, honestly, because most of the book isn't about the cards per se and more about everything else vampire and tarot. It's really, really good. I don't read with this deck too often, but when I do, it's one of the ones that gives me chills. I don't really know how to explain it, but it's just put together so well. And whilst often people will say these are quite pippish again, you can see they've got sort of suggestive scenes going on in them that I find help with reading them. I really hope this comes back into print for others to enjoy. Sticking with the vampire theme, but moving on to oracle decks and trying to make the best of the poor lighting that I've got and not reflect this, we have the Le Vampire Oracle by Lucy Cavendish. It might look playful and cute, but I really feel like this deck is no joke. It has some really interesting keywords and commentary before you've even gone into the book. Yeah, even alone, it has a real interesting balance. This isn't an oracle deck that's full of affirmation. This is naturally one that really does work with the various realms and cycles that we go through. See, envy, punishment, changing course. I like it. It feels like a challenging and vulnerable read for me, and it wasn't my first one of these deck creations. What I mean by that is it wasn't the first from these two. They've made a couple of decks together. I also have Oracle of the Shapeshifters, but it's not in this one. This one's got a vibe as well. It's got a vibe. It's not the oracle deck that I go to if I'm looking for something particularly light. Not that I am often, but you know, you know what you're getting with decks, and this doesn't pretend to be anything else. And I'm sure that I read with it that way as well, but I don't know, it had to be like that, right? Because it's still a vampire deck. I don't know, there's not much else I can say about this one, and it's super glossy, so it's really hard to angle like this, but it's an awesome oracle. This is the Fallen Angels Oracle, which I was really psyched to get because they reprinted it, and there's no changes other than to the box as far as I'm aware. And again, this is a really interesting deck. If you work with the fallen angels, demons, however you want to phrase it, this is the deck for you, my friends. I do have a really fantastic demon dictionary as well that I use alongside this deck. One of the things that I love about the artwork, on a complete side note, is I went through many phases at school trying to find myself. When I really sort of truly went into areas of expressing who I was, it was very kind of grungy, gothic, and it reminds me of really embracing that kind of part of myself with a few friends who were that way inclined as well, and going down to the graveyard and hanging out down there, enjoying the peace and quiet, and yeah, just being who we were really. And the pictures really remind me of that. But this is a deck that also feels a little bit like working with my Fae decks. It has a mind of its own, and I don't tend to personalise them, or I suppose humanise them. I can't think of the right word in that way. I have no issue with it, I just don't tend to. But there's a couple of them, a couple of Fae decks, one of the other decks that I'm going to show you, and this one that I've had a few creepy occurrences with them that I'm not going to share today, but I have, and not creepy, unsettling, like I don't want to use the deck, just synchronistic or strange, unexplainable, just, yeah, strange experiences. To be honest, this will really fit in the Normandy deck vibe place. As you can see, this is a very different style of reading than I generally go towards, but I adored this deck too much not to try it. It's called the Unnamed deck, which is difficult to look up if you're about to jump on the internet. So to be more helpful, it's created by 𝗕𝗕 Oracle. So this is 31 cards, but it has 2 keywords, and so it depends. Technically, if they're this way up, then you read this side, and if they're upside down, then you read the other side. But they have skeletons in every single card, so I was kind of into it straight away, and it's actually been really fun. It's one I totally get out around Halloween and Samhain to have fun with. It does come with, I should show them really quickly. I keep them with it, but separate. It does come with these, just for anyone who's curious. It has like this little expansion, but they're really funky and fun. As I say, it's not so much a deck that I have taken too seriously, but this is a very fun one. I nearly forgot to add this one, and so I am adding it in. This is the Personal Space Tarot, and I haven't used it yet, hence the strange order that it's in. This has been on my wish list since either 2016 or 17, and it's taken me all this time to get it. I didn't know that I was going to put it in this particular category, but as you can see, there are skeletons. They are a theme within this deck. I nearly put it into the nature, to be honest. Also, I was waiting for a replacement card for a damaged one, and because I got it for Christmas 2021, I just didn't use it because I figured I might as well wait for the replacement, and I'd use the other couple of new decks that I got. Therefore, I can't really talk much about this deck other than you can see that despite the fact that I've already got the Wooden Tarot, I've already got Antique Anatomy Tarot, I have other decks that you will see coming up like the Maiden Oracle and the 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗃 Tarot. they've got the kind of same colour vibes, but I really wanted this one. There's no interesting reason for me getting it. I don't know how it reads yet, other than I'm pretty certain it's going to be an easy reader for me. It's, I'd say, quite 𝗨𝗿𝗺𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 in places, and then the other places rely heavily on numerology, which is how the book is introduced to you, is through the numerology anyway, at least with the minors. It's a very simplified, symbolic rendition of each of the cards, which works beautifully for me. And after all these years, I didn't get bored of staring at it on Instagram, so when I finally got the chance to grab it in the UK, I went for it. So I have to let you know on this one, but I am excited to have it. So this deck comes in parts, and I do keep them separated in the way that you can see them. So this is the Memento Mori Oracle by the same person who created Antique Anatomy. This is my everyday witch deck, ritual deck, go-to oracle deck at the moment, and in a big way. And I know that I am not alone in that. In fact, the more people that I know that I hear talk about this deck, the more we're sounding like a cult. I'm very aware of that. I don't mean to be. We're not a bad cult. I'm sure every cult says that. But in all seriousness, this is the first deck that I've done any ancestor work with in any significant way. It's a big deal. It's a really fucking cool deck. So I'm going to pick up a portion of it and show you it. In this one is the Memento Mori main deck, which is the largest, and then this one has the general expansion in it. I think there might be a few Patreon cards. Check out the Patreon if you want to get in on those. But I think mainly that's what the two consist of. Oh, how appropriate, unfortunately, is this right now. This used to just be an aesthetic I enjoyed, and never once did I think that it would become as real as it feels right now. This deck has got freaking everything in it, and I would say if you're worried about size, you could probably go through it and really see what calls to you and what doesn't. I like to keep everything in it, but I know friends who have got the main portion of their deck down to a size that they prefer. There's a lot of witchy wonder, and I mean witchy in the grandest fashion. Like, you don't have to even consider yourself a witch, of course. It really is a great tool for extending your practice, sometimes because you don't even have all of these tools at your disposal. I know that I don't. I definitely don't have a harp. It brings a lot into my practice that I don't have, that's not accessible to me. For me, this really adds a layer of depth and gives me access to things, and is the other deck that, like I said, has a little bit of a mind of its own vibe going on sometimes. And what I like about the Ancestor pack is not only do we have some of the titles of family members that are represented, but once we've got past those, we then get into titles and relationships that offer a grander representation of gender, which I know is so welcome, especially in decks that are kind of this way inclined. So we've got spouse, we've got partner, friend, foe. I love that there's foe, teacher, student, and then if I remember correctly, yes, we've got our pronouns. So we've got she, her, he, him, they, them. I know that that's not all of the pronouns that people go by, but I feel like that's an expansion. And then we've got days and months and hours for the timing pack, which is really, really cool. To me, it makes sense to be able to access this all the time, because this fits with all of my reading styles and all of my wants and just works every day. Whereas these, that's something that I'm more trying out, getting a feel for. It's not something that I would use all the time at all, and some of the cards work really well for me, like in ritual and markers, so I like to keep them separate, because not only would it make this deck far too large for me to put in a bag, but it also keeps them separate so I can access them for their various uses as and when I want. And I do have one more deck, and it is by the same creator. It's not quite as beloved as the Memento Mori for me, but it is. They are in alphabetical order at the moment. That's just something weird I was doing the other day. But this is the Oracle of Oddities 1, 2 and 3. They are only available through one seller, and it is not the creator. The creator, I believe, would quite happily have them out of print. Whilst it could work in the same way, this does feel different to me. This is a deck that I come to on more of a general, just fleshing out and adding to my readings. As you can see, it's got the one keyword on it, which the Memento Mori doesn't, but the Memento Mori has symbols that I suppose are not necessarily always more expansive to me, but just different. It really does feel incredibly different. This has a more chill vibe, I suppose. It doesn't mean that it's any softer by any means. The words have a really nice mix. Some of them are really soft, some of them are pretty neutral, some of them are, again, those challenging parts of ourselves that sometimes are difficult to sit with. But it is another great deck for that, and of course it's a deck that is my aesthetic. So, shocker shocker, I really like that about it. You may have noticed that tea stain decks go down very well with me, or vintage decks, or whichever you want to call them. So yeah, I really appreciate this one. It was one of those ones that I try not to go on too much about because it's not easy to get a hold of, but at the same time I wanted it for a very, very long time. Needless to say, it's not as heavily used, but it is massively enjoyed and massively loved. And that is the last one for this particular category. I'd love to know what you think of these, what you think of the category. You know, chuck some comments, get involved down below if you fancy it. And otherwise, I'll be back soon with the next part in the series.